The notification came through at 2:14 in the afternoon while I was standing at my husband's graveside. I know the exact time because my phone buzzed in my coat pocket, and I remember thinking it was probably the funeral home with final paperwork. I didn't check it. I just kept my eyes on the casket and tried to breathe through my mouth because the cold air hurt less that way. My husband, Garrett, no, I'm sorry I keep doing that. Old habits. My husband, I'll call him what he was to me, the person who made coffee every single morning before I woke up, who left the mug on my side of the counter because he knew I needed it before I could form complete sentences. He died on a Wednesday in March. Cardiac arrest. He was 41 years old and he had no history of heart disease, and he died in the parking lot of a grocery store because his heart simply decided it was done. We had been married for 9 years. I stood at that grave in a borrowed black coat. Mine was at the dry cleaner and I never picked it up, with our 7-year-old daughter pressing her face into my ribs. Just the two of us, a pastor we'd met twice, and the funeral director whose name I've since forgotten. My in-laws were not there. My mother-in-law had called 3 days before to let me know they wouldn't be attending. Not because they were ill, not because of travel, she said, and I am going to quote her exactly because I have read that voicemail probably 40 times. We're going through our own grieving process and we don't think the service will give us closure. We'll honor Garrett in our own way. I didn't say anything back. I just stood in my kitchen holding my phone and staring at the cabinet above the stove that still had his coffee in it. What I didn't know, while I was standing at that grave, was what my in-laws were actually doing that afternoon. I found out 3 weeks later, and when I did, something in me went very, very quiet. Garrett and I met in our mid-20s at a mutual friend's birthday party. He was the kind of man who remembered the names of your co-workers after you mentioned them once, who would fix things in your apartment without being asked, who called his grandmother every Sunday. His family on the surface seemed warm. His mother, who I'll call my mother-in-law, made elaborate Sunday dinners. His father, who I'll call my father-in-law, had an enormous laugh that filled rooms. His younger brother, who I'll call my brother-in-law, was the kind of guy who always seemed to be between jobs but never seemed worried about it. That last part should have been a signal. When Garrett and I married, we were both working. I was in healthcare administration. He was in commercial real estate. We were careful with money in a specific way that people who grew up watching their parents not be careful become. We had a financial advisor by 30. We had a will. We had life insurance, a $900,000 policy that we had taken out when our daughter was born, because that's what you do when a small person becomes the entire reason you exist. The policy was in my name. I was the sole beneficiary. This is not unusual. This is, in fact, standard. My mother-in-law apparently did not think it was standard. The first indication came 8 days after the funeral, when she called and asked, gently, warmly, in that particular voice she used when she wanted something, whether I had thought about what Garrett would have wanted for the family. I told her I was still planning the logistics of single parenthood and grief, and could we talk later? She said, of course, take all the time you need. 4 days after that, my father-in-law called. He was less gentle. He asked directly what the life insurance payout looked like. I told him it was a private matter. He told me that Garrett was his son and that he had a right to know what assets were in play. I told him I would call him back. I didn't. Then came the email. My brother-in-law sent it. 11 paragraphs. I've kept a screenshot. In it, he laid out a proposal. He actually used the word proposal for how the life insurance money should be distributed. His argument was that Garrett had always intended to help the family financially, that my mother-in-law needed a new roof, that he himself needed capital to start a business, and that since I was young and working, I didn't need the full amount. He suggested I keep $200,000 and distribute the rest. I read that email 4 times. Then I called my own mother, who lives in another state, and I read it to her out loud. She was silent for a long moment, and then she said, "Sweetheart, you need a lawyer." I already had one. His name was in our family documents. He'd written our will, and I called him the next morning. But the week before that call, before I knew what I was dealing with, I agreed to a family dinner. My mother-in-law had asked me to bring our daughter. She said she wanted to see her granddaughter. I thought, these are still her grandparents. I thought, my daughter just lost her father. I thought, don't make this harder than it already is. I drove 40 minutes to their house on a Sunday evening. My daughter fell asleep in the back seat. When I carried her inside, I noticed boxes in the hallway, moving boxes. I noticed catalogue pages on the kitchen table, real estate listings circled in red pen. I noticed my father-in-law on his phone, and I caught the name of the app before he turned the screen over. Zillow. I set my daughter down on the couch and I stood in that kitchen and I felt the floor tilt slightly beneath me. My mother-in-law came in from the back room and hugged me and said dinner was almost ready. She was warm. She was completely normal. She asked how I was sleeping and whether my daughter had gone back to school yet. She refilled my water without being asked. I ate dinner. I helped clear the table. I drove home, and I sat in my car in my own driveway for 22 minutes. Not going inside, just sitting there in the dark, trying to organize what I knew into something that made sense. They had missed their son's funeral. They were already looking at houses. The math was not subtle. The lawyer's name doesn't matter, but what he told me does. He said that the life insurance policy was an asset separate from the estate, that I was the named beneficiary, and that nothing, not family expectation, not emotional pressure, not 11-paragraph emails, could change that. He said that if anyone attempted to contest the policy, they would have no grounds. He said that what I was describing sounded like coordinated financial coercion, and that I should document everything. I already was. I'm the kind of person who screenshots things. I always have been. It's a habit from years in healthcare administration. You document, you timestamp, you keep records. I had the voicemail saved. I had the email. I had my call log showing every contact they had made since Garrett died. I had photos of the moving boxes and the real estate listings taken quietly from my phone while my mother-in-law's back was turned. What I didn't have yet was the conversation that my brother-in-law had in my own living room 3 days after the funeral when he thought I was upstairs. We have a home security system. It has a camera in the living room pointed at the front door. The footage saves to a cloud account. I hadn't thought about it in months, but when I was gathering documentation, I logged in and scrolled back. There he was. My brother-in-law sitting on my couch on his phone. I couldn't hear the call. The camera doesn't have audio. But I could see his expression and I could see him gesturing. And then I saw him pull up something on his screen and hold it toward the camera's direction, just for a second. It was a screenshot of Garrett's life insurance policy, the one I'd stored in our shared documents folder, the one I hadn't realized he'd accessed. I called my lawyer back. He used a word I hadn't expected. Discovery. I want to tell you what happened when I confronted my mother-in-law, because it's important and because I think a lot of people have been in a version of that room. I drove to her house on a Tuesday morning. I had not called ahead. I had printed out 3 documents and put them in a manila folder, and I sat across from her at her kitchen table, the same table where we'd had Sunday dinners for 9 years, and I told her what I knew. She did not deny the moving boxes. She said they were getting organized. She did not deny the Zillow browsing. She said they were just looking. She did not address the shared documents folder or what her younger son had done with those files. What she said instead was that I was being selfish. She said that Garrett would not have wanted me to keep all of it. She said that family takes care of family. She said that she had raised a man who was generous to a fault and that she expected me to honor his memory by sharing what he'd left behind. I let her finish. Then I opened the manila folder and placed the first document on the table. It was a copy of the life insurance policy with the beneficiary designation highlighted. I placed the second document beside it. It was a letter from my lawyer. I placed the third document on top. It was a screenshot of the home security camera footage, time-stamped, showing my brother-in-law in my living room 3 days after his brother's funeral, looking at files he had no right to access. My mother-in-law looked at those 3 pieces of paper for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, "We were just trying to understand our options." I said, "I understand, these are yours." I drove home. I called my lawyer from the car. The next 2 weeks were a particular kind of cold. Not dramatic, not screaming or threats or anything cinematic. Just a slow, methodical process of untangling. I removed my brother-in-law's access to the shared documents folder. I changed the passwords on everything connected to Garrett's accounts that I had any legal standing to change. I went through our joint email archives and flagged anything that showed Garrett's specific wishes, because his email, which I now had full access to as his estate administrator, contained something I had not expected. 3 months before he died, Garrett had drafted an email. He had never sent it. It was addressed to me and it was titled, in the subject line, "Just in case." He had written it after a conversation with his family that had apparently gone badly, a conversation I had not been told about. In it, he said that he was worried his family would put pressure on me if anything happened to him. He said that the life insurance money was for our daughter. He said that he trusted me completely. He said that he loved me and that he was probably being paranoid, but he wanted me to know anyway. I sat with that email for a long time. I read it probably 15 times over the course of a week, and then I had my lawyer notarize a printed copy because I knew I might need it. My in-laws did not, in the end, pursue any legal action. My lawyer's letter appears to have made the situation clear. My brother-in-law sent me one more email, shorter this time, less structured, that said I was destroying the family and that I would regret isolating my daughter from her grandparents. I did not respond to it. I printed it out and added it to the folder. What I did do with the money was this: I paid off our mortgage. I established a college fund for my daughter that no one can touch. I created a small charitable fund in Garrett's name, attached to a local youth mentorship organization that he had volunteered with for 6 years, and that had never received anything from his family, despite them knowing it existed. And I enrolled my daughter in the grief counseling program she's been in since April, because she lost her father and she deserves to have someone in her corner who is specifically trained to help her with that. My in-laws found out about the charitable fund through mutual friends. My mother-in-law sent me a text. It said, "I can't believe you would use Garrett's memory for a publicity stunt." I did not respond to that either. It has been 7 months. My daughter is doing better than I feared and harder than I hoped, which is probably the most honest thing I can say about grief. She still asks for her dad sometimes in the specific way 7-year-olds do, which is matter-of-factly and at completely unpredictable moments, in the cereal aisle, at bath time, in the car on the way to school. I answer her honestly. I tell her he loved her. I tell her he still does, in whatever way that can be true. I have not spoken to my mother-in-law or my father-in-law since that morning at the kitchen table. I have not responded to my brother-in-law's emails. I sent a letter through my lawyer establishing that any future contact should go through him. People ask me sometimes if I feel guilty, if I feel like I should have handled it differently, if I should have given them something, not all of it, but something, just to keep the peace. And I think about that unsent email. I think about Garrett sitting somewhere, maybe at his desk, maybe on the couch, writing words he never planned to send but needed to say. I think about him typing "just in case" into a subject line and then setting it aside and going back to his life, back to making my coffee every morning, back to being the person he was. He knew. He saw it before I did. The money was never what this was about. I knew that even when I was sitting in my car in the dark, what it was about was whether I would fold, whether grief would make me small enough to fit into the shape they needed me to be. Whether I would spend the rest of my life explaining to my daughter why we gave away the thing her father left her. I didn't fold. I'm still standing in the same kitchen where I listened to that voicemail. The coffee cabinet is different now. I changed the brand because his was too hard to look at for a while. And then one morning I bought it again because I realized I missed the smell. My daughter put a drawing on the refrigerator last week. It's a picture of 3 people, her, me, and a figure she labeled Dad in her careful 2nd grade handwriting. with a sun above all of us that takes up half the page. I didn't lose my husband's family. I stopped waiting for them to become something they never were. And everything Garrett left behind, every cent, every memory, every intention he typed into a draft he never sent, is exactly where he meant it to be. There's a draft email sitting in a dead man's outbox that I've read more times than I can count. He titled it "Just in Case." He never sent it. And somehow that unsent email told me more about who Garrett was and who his family was than 9 years of Sunday dinners ever did. I think about cause and effect a lot now. Not in a mystical way, not in the sense that the universe was sending me signs, more in the plain, observable way that choices compound. My in-laws made a choice when they didn't come to their son's funeral. They made another choice when my father-in-law asked about the payout 8 days later, and another when my brother-in-law opened a shared folder that wasn't his to open. None of those were small choices dressed up as big ones. They were exactly as large as they appeared, and they produced exactly the outcome you'd expect from choices that size. What I keep coming back to is that I almost let it work. Not because I was weak, I don't think that anymore, that because grief does something specific to your ability to trust your own perception, you're already off balance, you're already questioning everything. And when someone you've known for nearly a decade looks you in the eye and tells you that you're the one being selfish, there's a moment, and I remember this moment clearly, sitting at that kitchen table, where you wonder if they might be right. That moment passed, and what replaced it wasn't anger, exactly. It was clarity. The kind that only comes when you stop trying to make someone else's behavior make sense and just look at what it actually is. I thought a lot about what got me through those months. Part of it was practical. I had a lawyer. I had documentation. I had Garrett's own words preserved in a draft he'd never sent. But the practical things only work if you're willing to use them. And using them required something I hadn't quite named until recently. I had to believe that what I was protecting was worth protecting. Not just the money, my daughter's future, the integrity of what Garrett had built and intended, the version of myself that she would grow up watching. There's a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It's not the strength of someone who flips a table or delivers a speech. It's the strength of someone who sits in a car in her own driveway for 22 minutes. Lets the reality of what's happening settle fully into her body, and then goes inside and makes her daughter breakfast in the morning. It's the strength of doing the next right thing when there's no one watching and no one applauding, and grief is still sitting in the passenger seat everywhere you go. And there's a kind of intelligence that has nothing to do with credentials. It's the intelligence of knowing when a situation has changed and adjusting accordingly, of recognizing that warmth can be a tactic, of understanding that a family dinner with moving boxes in the hallway is not actually a family dinner. My daughter drew a picture last week. 3 people, a son that takes up half the page. She labeled her father. She put him in the picture without being asked. That is what I was protecting. That is what Garrett was protecting when he typed those words into a draft and saved them without sending. He knew, the way people sometimes know, that love is not just a feeling. It's a set of decisions you make in advance, before you know you'll need them. I made mine. I'd make them again.